C17H19NO3. This molecule, it's incredibly important in the history of medicine and surprisingly war. You may know it by its marketed name, morphine. It's a popular prescription-only painkiller. It's used during surgeries to stabilize patients. It's an effective drug during childbirth. Medics administer it to wounded soldiers during military conflicts, and it also helps with cancer treatments. But it's also highly addictive. This is why in 1914, with the introduction of the Harrison Narcotics Act, morphine's production, import, and distribution were regulated in the U.S. But the rest of the world took a while to catch on. Germany, for instance, the country where morphine was discovered by 21-year-old pharmacist assistant Friedrich Sertuner in 1803, regulated morphine and other opioids in 1929. That year is quite important because it's not too far from the year 1932, when Hitler's Nazi Party took control of Germany.
2 oder 3 Monate vergangen sind, wird euer Terror beseitigt sein.
The Nazi regime crafted a public image as a staunch opponent of drugs, waging aggressive campaigns against tobacco and alcohol. But the reality behind this facade was far more sinister. Welcome to Nutty Productions, where we delve into the hidden world of drugs in Nazi Germany. The rise of Nazis and the drug addiction in Germany had a common cause: the First World War. The Great War transformed Germany into a shattered nation pushed under the boot of the Allied countries. The punitive Treaty of Versailles imposed a suffocating occupation, while the return of millions of wounded and traumatized veterans exacerbated the national crisis. They were hurt, both physically and mentally, and had a lot of pain to deal with. Fortunately, or unfortunately, their country was the biggest pharmaceutical wonder in the world. Not only morphine, but the Big C and the Big H, drugs that are considered the most illegal drugs in the world, were invented in Germany. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, Germany enjoyed a virtual monopoly over the world. The country had an abundance of painkillers and tablets for people in lots of pain. Pharmaceutical and industry pills were available over the counter. No prescription was needed. For good or worse, Germany was sympathetic towards junkies and treated addiction as a fairly curable disease. A high-ranking official in the Reich Health Office in the 1930s and 1940s, Oberregierungsrat Erich Hesse, reported that from 1913 to 1922 there was an increase in opioids and the number of reported junkies rose from 282 to 682. Most of these victims of drug addiction were wounded soldiers from the front line. And by 1928, there were 6,356 morphine dependents in Germany, of whom 560 were physicians. In 1929, Germany revised the
Betäubungsmittelgesetz
and regulated use of opioids and other such tempting drugs. The effect was seen almost instantly, because by 1931, the addiction rate in Germany was reported significantly lower, with 0.3 addicts per 10,000 males and 0.1 addicts per 10,000 females. The estimates indicated that there were roughly 1,200 addicts in Germany, a nation that was right at the cusp of a political coup that would change Germany's history forever. But you shouldn't consider these numbers anything more than speculation for that time period. Experts say today that these numbers are supposed to be a lot higher. So when the Nazis came to power, drug usage was on the decline, but despite the regulations, a lot of such tentative drugs were still allowed to be sold over the counter without any prescription required. The Nazi regime took a hardline approach to addiction, yet their primary focus was on the more visible problems of alcohol and tobacco within German society. That said, this tough attitude existed only on paper, given Hitler neither drank nor smoked and the Nazi Party wanted all of Germany to idolize their leaders. But the real deal was they were not that tone-deaf. They were well aware of how a ban on alcohol had played out in America. Prohibition failed at its moral objective and saw a sharp rise in crime and corruption, a decline in tax revenue, and alcohol consumption-related deaths eventually only rose through the later years of Prohibition in the U.S. anyway. The anti-alcohol campaign was mostly used as an excuse against the homeless and people suffering from depression and other obvious mental health issues. The government agencies branded them as asocial or work-shy and used it as an excuse to send them to concentration camps or asylums. Starting in 1939, as Hitler's dream of purity launched a wide-scale euthanasia program, a lot of struggling alcoholics were sent to be euthanized to cleanse Germany of their weakness. After the passage of the Law for the Prevention of Genetically Diseased Offspring in July of 1943, many alcoholics were also sterilized. At the same time, Nazi health officials introduced a series of initiatives to support the regime's slogan, "Wholesome life is a national duty." Primarily aimed at German youth, this campaign promoted the production of non-alcoholic beverages, urged young people to abstain completely from drinking or smoking, and called for physical exercise for the entire nation. But in practice, the Nazis in Germany simply raised the taxes on alcohol and left it at that. Instead, they focused mostly on tobacco, and for good reason. During the Weimar Republic period, German scientists figured out the correlation between tobacco consumption and lung cancer. So when Nazis rose to power in Germany, cancer had become the biggest public enemy in the fatherland. Cancer alone was roughly claiming 100,000 German lives every year, and combining the disease was a big part of Hitler's agenda after taking control of the national government. The Nazis implemented different preventive health measures to lower cancer rates in the Volksgemeinschaft, or the so-called Aryan community in Germany. The SS and the German army organized mass X-ray screenings for cancer and other diseases and banned smoking in public places. Ironically, at the same time, the SA, or the stormtroopers, launched their own brand of cigarettes, called Storm cigarettes. How creative. Also, the German soldiers and police who participated in mass executions during the Holocaust routinely received extra rations of alcohol. So it was a mixed effort campaign at best, and predictably yielded a mixed result at best. Actually, no, it was a total failure. German consumption of both alcohol and tobacco actually rose overall during the first several years of the Nazi regime. Between 1933 and 1939, beer consumption in Germany increased by 23%, wine consumption almost doubled, and champagne consumption increased by a staggering 500%. But what about the hard drugs? Now, that's where the story gets interesting. Very interesting. In the early 1930s, as the Nazis rose through the ranks of the bureaucracy, the consumption of morphine, diamorphine, or heroin, and numbrino, or cocaine, sharply saw a decline among the substance junkies of Germany. So, what exactly did the Nazis do to control such a major issue in the country? They didn't do a damn thing. Absolutely nothing. Despite the fact that regulatory laws took effect in 1929, when the Nazis came into power in 1933, they continued the relaxed and liberal drug policy adopted during the Weimar Republic. No drug laws, not even, and hold on for this, not even Rauschgiftbekämpfung were designed to follow the prejudice and divisive policies that fuel Nazi politics. Even though it is true that Nazis used propaganda to connect the German and European Jewish community with recreational drug consumption and debauchery, there are no recorded instances of junkies being sent to concentration camps, even though this was common in the case of alcoholics. Despite that fact, the Nazi propaganda tried its best to make Germany as drug-clean as possible without pushing it for it legally. Overdoing hard drugs recreationally was never targeted by the moral police of the German Nazi government, as it was seen as a hobby of the upper class and not a root-level issue. For real, diamorphine and numbrino were being used as remedies for many diseases and ailments by German doctors. Talking about their own, the Nazis propagated Hitler as a healthy saint, but his doctors were fueling the Fuhrer with a high dosage of a capsule cocktail. He was a vegetarian with a strong penchant for sweets. During the 1936 Olympics, he was seen visibly shaking. Hitler's closest doctors used him as patient A for many of their experiments. Even though Nazis worked hard on keeping his drug-fueled diet a secret, videos got out and it became a popular secret. It's believed that he was taking loads of anabolic steroids. That would explain a lot. His closest doctor administered numbrino more than 50 times between 1940 and 1944 to Hitler. According to Norman Ohler, the author of Blitzed, Hitler nearly died of numbrino in the fall of 1944, which could have ended the war sooner than it did in Europe. The same doctor also administered Hamburg once to Hitler. Hamburg is used as a treatment for Parkinson's, and this gave wind to the rumor that Hitler might have suffered from Parkinson's since 1935. It is rumored that Hitler may have been on as many as 80 different drugs during his reign as Chancellor of Germany, with Eukodal being his favorite. The main ingredient of Eukodal is oxycodone, another popular opioid. But all was about to change in the mid-30s as Pervitin came along.
There is no doubt about the worldwide abuse of large amounts of brain ticklers by the Japanese, American, and British forces during World War II. But the trend was established by the Germans during the initial phases of the war, long before others joined the bandwagon. While Nazi ideology was fundamentally anti-drug and social use of drugs in Nazi Germany was considered both a sign of individual weakness and moral decay of the entire society, They had no qualms about being hypocritical to abuse drugs in the military. In fact, the Nazi propaganda promoted black beauties as a privilege offered only to the soldiers. While other drugs were banned or discouraged, speed was touted as a miracle product when it appeared on the market in the late 1930s. The little pill had a poetic connection with the Nazi slogan, "Germany Awake," as it would energize and boost the confidence of the soldiers. That played right into the Third Reich's obsession with physical and mental superiority. While other drugs, such as alcohol or white junk, were sort of an escapist delight, amps were helpful with hyper-alertness and vigilance. We've already discussed in our older videos how much armies were obsessed with the mythical concept of super soldiers during the Second World War, and bumblebees also contributed to that fascination. The lightning oranges were considered a small shortcut to turn ordinary soldiers into superhumans. As Hitler declared, "We don't need weak people, we want only the strong," and thus the abuse of speed became a synonym with being strong and getting stronger. However, the blame for introducing speed to Germany goes to U.S. athletes of the Berlin Olympics in 1936. The German chemist Friedrich Hochschild had been aware that Americans were using Benzedrine, an American version of Pixies, for doping during the '36 Olympics. Benzedrine was also used by U.S. forces during the Second World War, especially by the Air Force pilots to stay up in the air for longer hours. Discovering American speed led Friedrich Hochschild to research into the drug, and he managed to synthesize a close cousin of amps. This drug later would become the center plot of a great TV show in the early 21st century, where a cancer-ridden teacher would join hands with a good-for-nothing student to become the underworld king. At that time, Friedrich Hochschild was working for Temmler-Werke, a Berlin-based pharmaceutical company. Temmler-Werke came up with a brand name for this fascinating chemical in the winter of 1937 and called it Pervitin. Thanks to the company's aggressive advertising campaign, Pervitin became well known within a few months. The tablets were wildly popular and could be purchased without a prescription in pharmacies. One could even buy chocolates spiked with speed. But the drug's most important use was yet to come. From 1939 to 1945, the Third Reich astonished Europe with its blitzkrieg on all battlefronts. Its military efficiency has since then become a leitmotif of history studies. Although academically, Nazi success in this period has been attributed to its technological superiority, optimization, and innovative strategies, there was more to that though. The Wehrmacht had nothing left to chance. Everything was meticulously and accurately calculated, from the weight of the firearms to the offensive timings, as well as when and how to abuse performance-enhancing drugs. Throughout the war, the Germans consumed Pervitin. It produced higher energy and reduced sleep needs and hunger. It was also attributed to sparking great enthusiasm and made soldiers believe the Nazi propaganda was all rainbows and unicorns. Pervitin enjoyed a legal status in Germany until 1941, and until then it was broadly advertised all over the nation. Billboards were strewn throughout Berlin from 1938 to its regulation in 1941 as consumption became more and more obscure. According to Norman Ohler's book, Blitzed: Drugs in Nazi Germany, the entire nation was once dependent on speed at one point. It may be a matter of ridicule now, but Pervitin was never meant to be a military drug for the Nazis, but it was intended to compete with the American beverage popular in Germany called Coca-Cola. Temmler employed Mathis & Son with the advertising campaign of their new casual drug. Germany was going through a calamity back then. The embarrassment of the defeat in the First World War, the humiliating Treaty of Versailles, economic crisis, political turmoil, the rise of nationalist rage, and blaring bugles for another great war. All of that didn't make it easy to cope for an average German citizen. And here came Pervitin, offering vigor, efficiency, and calmness, so the population welcomed the energizing substance with open arms. It was cheap, helped people work, spread euphoria throughout the country, and was not even considered a drug at the time. Furthermore, the drug was not only popular among workers. Adolf Hitler himself was introduced to drugs by Morell. Soon, the drug was issued a performance test on students to see how it would affect their focus and work behavior. Otto Ranke, director of the Institute for General and Defense Physiology at Berlin's Academy of Military Medicine, soon returned with the conclusion that the drug indeed could bolster German efforts on the front. He suggested that speed and its compounds could improve the soldiers' performance. Following the research conducted under the spearhead of Otto Ranke, Pervitin was introduced in the daily rations of the Nazi soldiers and was to be consumed up to twice a day. The drug soon began showing its effects. The soldiers were acting fearless and were extra elated even in the most morbid situations. Otto Ranke's goal to defeat the enemy with chemically enhanced soldiers was now a reality. The soldiers were walking up to 60 kilometers and working nonstop for 3 days without sleeping. This was the biggest aid that helped the invasion of Poland in 1939, the Blitzkrieg through the French Ardennes in 1940, and the Balkan Campaign of 1941, where Germans fought unceasingly for 11 days. Otto Ranke was over the moon with the success of his little find and had become a daily user of the drug himself. He was living the dream of Nazi grandeur of world domination and seeing himself next to Hitler in no time. His correspondence indicates that he and his desk workers, too, were working without any sleep and popping pills left and right, ignoring the prescription limit to manage the self-inflicted demands of their jobs. Before playing a crucial part in the invasion of Poland, the drug was given a test run by the Wehrmacht medical officers. They ordered soldiers of the 3rd Tank Division to take it during the occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1938. The success there cleared the path for widespread military use in the Poland invasion that caused the death of over 100,000 Polish soldiers. This was the moment when the term Blitzkrieg, or the Lightning War, came into existence. Being high on speed allowed German soldiers to emphasize haste and surprise to catch the enemy off guard and trample over them. Pervitin eliminated what differentiates humans from machines: fatigue. The need for rest, sleep, and eat was a tale of the past now, and nothing was slowing down as tanks and companies of men marched together at an unrelenting pace to win all of Europe for Der Fuhrer. However, Pervitin wasn't a miracle. It was just burning candles from both ends. Nothing in his universe was as benevolent as Pervitin was promising to be for Hitler's Germany. The drug obviously had its side effects. Early reports found in the archives mention adverse effects such as exhaustion, heart pain, and circulation problems. This instigated further study led by the Reichsfeldführer Leonardo Conti, who among others soon sounded the alarm bells about the risk of Pervitin, and that led to its regulation and prohibition in 1941. The drug was now available through prescription only, but these warnings fell on deaf ears. Despite the anti-drug rhetoric of Hitler and the Nazi Party that had been disseminated since 1933, the new regulations were widely ignored. They had a perfect reason for it too. All of Germany was hooked on Pervitin, and sudden prohibition caused a large national withdrawal. Ironically, Hitler himself was heavily addicted. Instead of causing the reduction of the German economic dependence on pharmaceuticals and tackling an alarming addiction problem, the prohibition was deemed pretty much a failure, even on the civilian front. The military didn't even care for the prohibition or regulation. As a matter of fact, military officials seemed to find its distribution legitimate, especially due to the short-term benefits it was providing the army. The consumption increased during the ill-fated Operation Barbarossa from June to December of 1941, immediately after the restrictions were imposed. There's also a conspiracy side of the regulation. German civilians getting hooked on Pervitin could have been considered an unnecessary stress on the production of speed pills. So it's entirely possible that the sham of prohibition was created just to ensure more supply to the soldiers who were about to face the Red Army on their home turf. From 1941, the Reich knew that Pervitin brought side effects and risk of addiction. However, even when the soldiers were dying because of heart failure or committing suicide because of the psychotic phases, the amps continued to fuel the country until the end of the war. The Blitzkrieg depended on speed, for relentlessly pushing ahead with tank troops, day and night. It was the cause of the fall of Denmark and Norway in 1940. Within a month, the Nazi army, high on speed, annexed Holland, Belgium, and finally France. When they crossed into France, the French reinforcements had yet to arrive, and their defenses were overwhelmed by the German attack. German tanks covered 240 miles of challenging terrain, including the Ardennes forest, in 11 days. They also bypassed the entrenched British and French forces who had mistakenly assumed the Ardennes was impassable. Paratroopers sometimes landed ahead of the advance, causing chaos behind enemy lines. According to the British press, these soldiers were heavily drugged, fearless, and berserk like Vikings. Even Churchill confessed he was dumbfounded by the overrunning of the whole communications and countryside by an irresistible incursion of armored vehicles. He admitted in his memoirs that it was the greatest surprise of his life. The biggest downside of Pervitin was dependence and addiction, of course. Providing soldiers with daily doses inevitably made them and their performance dependent on Pervitin. And when the supply dried up, shortage and withdrawal caused chaos among German ranks. The symptoms included nausea, hallucinations, anxiety, depression, and diminution of cognitive capacities were rampant in German camps. Despite Conti's efforts to limit the use of Pervitin, the army was obsessed with the drug and continued its abuse. The situation escalated over the years, and soldiers died increasingly from cardiac failure, death, or military miscalculations. The army wasn't controlling Pervitin. It was Pervitin controlling the army. In fact, Morell, who ironically introduced Der Führer Hitler to the drug, was also the one who revealed during interrogations how Hitler's own addiction to Pervitin led to poor strategic decisions, resulting in enemy victory at Normandy and ultimately the fall of Berlin. Wehrmacht's miracle drug shined brightly during the early years of the war, but also backfired and became the reason for the decline of the Third Reich. Himmler and Vinke, the maker of the drug, were the only winners, making huge profits of relentless production. Tell us in the comments, how do you think the Second War would have been different without the use of Pervitin?
After Pervitin's failure was recognized by the German leadership, the Nazis didn't just withdraw from the drug, but they also frantically began to look for an alternative. But to find another miracle drug, the Nazi scientists needed lab rats to experiment on. But time was short to run animal experiments, so they skipped the process entirely and focused on human experiments using the usual Nazi scapegoats, the concentration camp inmates. Near Berlin, there's a concentration camp, Sachsenhausen, which is known for its circular track that was used to punish the shoe-walking unit prisoners. These prisoners had already been a part of an experiment that was used as a quality test for newer models of shoes and parts of shoes for the German army and leaders. This track had different layers of different surfaces, like tarmac, stone, and sand to test the shoes. The shoe-walking unit was forced to wear the shoes and walk for days on this track to test durability, comfort, and resistance to make sure the shoes were up to the mark during the difficult days when leather had become scarce in Europe because of the war. But after the debacle with Pervitin happened and the German army was suffering from withdrawal and being spread thinly on both fronts, Sachsenhausen got new orders. In March of 1944, Sachsenhausen came under the direct authority of the German Navy, and they had new assignments for the shoe-walking unit, which also got a new name, the Pill Patrol. They received a batch of 10 experimental drugs, codenamed Drug D to D10, that were meant to be administered by the Pill Patrol. All these drugs were various combinations of numbrino, speed, diamorphine, and a bunch more opioids to find out which particular combination could keep the inmates awake the longest. The inmates were then forced to walk under the influence of these drugs with heavy backpacks on their backs that were full of stones, with malnourished bodies that were also possibly ridden with parasites. Despite that, these stimulants were so strong that one prisoner began walking at 8 p.m. one day and ended up walking till 4 in the evening the next day, lasting for 20 hours straight. An eyewitness said, at first, the members of the punishment battalion whistled and sang songs, but most of them collapsed after the first 24 hours. The German Navy had hoped to use D9, the drug combination that was ultimately selected for the new mini U-boat drivers that were being prepared to sneak deep into enemy territory and launch massive attacks. Prisoners who failed to meet the camp's grueling demands faced a horrifying array of punishments. These included threats of attack by guard dogs, the specter of execution, and the certainty of brutal physical torment, either immediate or delayed. Dachau, a concentration camp near Munich, used mescaline for a different purpose. The German camp in Auschwitz was having trouble dealing with the captured members of the Polish resistance, and Dachau became the experiment ground for Auschwitz. The inmates at Dachau were given mescaline secretly mixed with coffee. When the effect set in, the inmates were told that their mind was controlled by the administrator. Then they would be asked intimate questions to figure out how much dosage would be perfect to extract information from the Polish resistance members at Auschwitz. At the end of the war, when Americans liberated Dachau inmates, they found records of these interrogation methods and took the method with them back to the U.S., where the method became a tool of American counterintelligence during the Cold War and beyond. Yeah, that happened. The story doesn't end there, though. Despite discovering the ill effects of Pervitin in the most horrid way possible, the little miracle pill stayed on the German market long after the war as well. In fact, it found its way back among the common public as both medicine and a recreational drug, although the Nazis themselves had banned its sale among the public in 1941. Now, for years, both in East and West Germany, Pervitin was being prescribed as an antidepressant and a weight loss remedy by certified doctors. Pervitin was also sought after by university students facing extreme stress with their studies, especially students studying medicine, who were the most common customers that purchased Pervitin tablets illegally. Given the record of speed pills among athletes, Pervitin also became popular among Olympians and professional sportspersons in the 50s and the 60s. In 1968, Pervitin reappeared in the headlines of newspapers when boxer Josef "Joop" Else, who was 28 years old, failed to wake up after a knockout in the ring following some 150 blows to the head. People were astonished to see him standing nearly comatose and taking a beating without any regard for self-defense. It was an astonishing case, as Pervitin made Joop take so many blows before knocking him out, but also because of that he couldn't be saved. Joop became Germany's first known victim of doping, yet for unexplained reasons, the drug remained available on the market. Himmler Werke secured contracts to provide Pervitin to both West and East German militaries. Despite its initial widespread use, the Bundeswehr prohibited the stimulant in the 1970s. East Germany followed suit with a nationwide ban. In the end, Pervitin was outlawed entirely following German reunification in 1990. Thanks for watching another Nutty Productions video. Like the video and share it so more people can watch it. If you'd like to watch more videos from us, don't forget to click the subscribe button and the bell icon.